Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. A federal judge considers a temporary restraining order over the conditions at a suburban ICE facility. The battle over the control of Congress heats up as California voters consider redrawing districts and as lawmakers in Illinois also consider redistricting. And the Trump administration moves to end automatic renewals for some immigrant work permits, what it means for workers and the larger economy. First off tonight, a federal judge is calling conditions at the ICE detention center in suburban Broadview unacceptable. He's expected to rule tomorrow on whether to grant a temporary restraining order to address what advocates are calling, quote, inhumane and unlawful conditions at the facility. The suit, filed by the MacArthur Justice Center in Illinois and ACLU Illinois, claims the Broadview facility is overcrowded, lacking beds, hygiene, medical supplies, and working showers. They also say it lacks enough toilets and provides insufficient food and water access. Federal officials deny those accusations, and attorneys for the federal government argue that if the restraining order were to be approved as written, it would effectively halt their ability to execute immigration laws in Illinois. For more on the testimony given in court today, please visit our website. Former Vice President Dick Cheney is being remembered tonight as one of the country's most powerful but also polarizing vice presidents in modern history. He died yesterday due to complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. Over the years, he'd survived 5 heart attacks as well as a heart transplant. Cheney was considered a quiet force while serving first President George H.W. Bush as defense secretary and later his son, President George W. Bush, as his vice president. For all Cheney's conservatism, though, he was publicly supportive of his daughter Mary, who came out as gay years before broad support for gay marriage. And in a 2024 twist, Cheney said he was voting for Democrat Kamala Harris for president in opposition to Donald Trump. He is survived by his wife and daughters. Dick Cheney was 84 years old. The city's inspector general says the mayor's office still isn't allowing her to search for gifts that he may have accepted on the city's behalf without reporting them. Deborah Witzberg's office says the mayor's staff blocked Watchdog staff twice from accessing a storage room for those gifts as mandated by the city's ethics ordinance. But the mayor's office disputes that city law entitles the IG to make unannounced inspections of the mayor's offices. For more recommendations from the inspector general and how the mayor's office responded to the report, you can visit our website. Up next, as political observers closely watch California's redistricting vote, some Illinois lawmakers are pushing to redraw the state's congressional districts. More on that right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Republicans and Democrats are in an escalating national fight over congressional seats, and Illinois is being encouraged to get in the ring. Some Congress members, including the top House Democrat, are pushing the state to redraw its districts to gain an additional Democratic seat. Local lawmakers have the final say, and as they mull the idea, California is voting today on a redistricting plan that could give Democrats 5 more seats in the Golden State. So joining us to discuss all of that and more are Elizabeth Grossman, Executive Director of Common Cause Illinois, and Ryan Tolley, Executive Director of Change Illinois. Thanks to you both for joining us. So what do you make? I want to ask this question to both of you. What do you make of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries' push to redraw the state's districts? Elizabeth, first to you.
Sure. I think redistricting is really terrible for voters. We know that, and Common Cause for a long time has, redistricting that's gerrymandered is very bad for voters. Common Cause for a long time has stood against gerrymandering, and we're going to continue to do so. I think what's happening now is that we're in an unprecedented situation where we have the President of the United States who went to Texas and said, find me 5 more seats, and the Texas legislature acquiesced, and now states are trying to respond to what's happened. And so I think that's what's happening here. As an organization, Common Cause never supports gerrymandering. We think that that's really, really bad for voters. But if a state like Illinois is going to do it, we have developed fairness principles for the state to ensure that this is really a limited thing, including a promise that they will adhere to fair maps in the future.
Okay. Ryan, same question to you. What do you make of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries' push to get Illinois to do this?
Yeah, we're very concerned about it at Change Illinois. I mean, gerrymandering is a form of voter suppression. When gerrymandering happens, it's much harder for them to hold elected leaders accountable because who is likely to win is predetermined for them. And so we understand, the national landscape of this. Gerrymandering is wrong in the state of Texas, it's wrong in Illinois, but for Illinois voters here, we should really, be concerned about further attempts to gerrymander the state's congressional district.
So Texas is facing legal challenges after its remap in August. California also voting on a redistricting plan to give Democrats 5 more seats. Indiana also considering remapping there, although there's a question of whether or not lawmakers there actually have an appetite to do this. Yeah. Ryan, as more states start to move forward with redrawing their districts, is there a case that Illinois should do the same in the interest of balancing or tipping the scales?
For us, I don't think so. Illinois itself has been highly gerrymandered. Prior to the 2021 remap, our state, we lost a congressional seat and Democrats redrew the map to give themselves a 14-3 advantage, essentially eliminating 2 formerly Republican seats in the state. And so we're already starting from a point where the state itself is highly gerrymandered. So there's very slim margins to pick up additional seats for Democrats. And so the political reality we live in the state is there's not a lot more they can do without diminishing some of the districts that are currently either black majority or black plurality districts, which would diminish black communities' voice in the congressional map.
So yeah, and I want to come back to that in a little bit as well. So both of your organizations have pushed for redistricting reform that allows remaps to be done independently. U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, when he joined us a couple of months ago, said that he couldn't support that unless all of the states were doing that versus just one state here and one state there. Is that what it would take, do you think? Elizabeth, I want to come to you on this first. And how do you sell that to politicians across the country, that it should be nationwide, not just sporadically across different states?
I think that the conversation is really expanding now, where people are thinking about whether this needs to happen nationally. We absolutely support it happening nationally. I think that's absolutely right. I think that the states that have pushed for independent maps and the independent maps process are doing that in order to give the voters in that state their voice. It's really important that the voters are the ones selecting the politicians and not the other way around. But I think that we can do both, and we're going to continue to fight here in Illinois for a map process that actually centers the voters, while also fighting for reforms nationally.
Ryan, same question to you. How do you get all the states to get on board with that?
Yeah, ideally there would be a national solution that would, make sure it's a level playing field across the country. I would also encourage folks to think about, too, though, at our local level. Our city council districts are drawn by politicians. The county districts are drawn by the elected leaders there. We could start reform locally and build up to that. There's many ways to implement independent redistricting that puts the power back in the hands of voters at the local level, that doesn't even wade into this congressional fight over, Congress, control of Congress, where we can start building momentum and support across the country that could lead to a movement nationally.
Illinois currently has 14 Democratic seats, 3 Republican seats, as we've already stated. Ryan, how much of a power shift could, another Democratic seat make in a state that is already pretty blue? And to your earlier point, what's the impact going to be on black voter support?
Yeah. So one of the things they have to look at, too, is, they would change the map. there would still be the 28 election, 2030 election before the next scheduled remap. And so can they pass a map that would give Democrats more seats that could withstand through a few more elections? And that's the biggest question for them, I think, in weighing the political viability of this. Can you actually, add seats that would last until the next time we do this? The other question comes is, where do you get additional, areas of the state that would lean Democratic? And the concern is that you would diminish black voting power in the state by doing that. And because there's, when you look downstate, Western Illinois, there's not a lot of areas for gains for Democrats, and so then you have to start looking at the suburban area and the city to add an additional seat for them.
Elizabeth, Common Cause, as you said, you all have you've listed criteria for redistricting, calling for more racial equity for voters of color and public participation as well. At the same time, though, the Supreme Court has said, or they are considering whether there should be an expiration date for race as a factor in drawing voting districts. Is it possible for Illinois to create a new district without further hurting voter representation?
It's hard to say. I haven't seen the maps. They're not making maps publicly available. And that's also one of our criterion, is that there needs to be public participation in this process. And that's historically been something that Illinois legislators are not willing to do. But absolutely, I think we need to continue to focus on the way that voter suppression has impacted Black and brown communities in particular. It is not racially neutral. It historically has been a tool of racism. And so I think it is a mistake to eliminate race from the consideration. And that is why that is one of our criterion as well, is that we are ensuring that any new maps are not diluting the political power of communities of color.
What are some of your other criteria?
The public participation is huge. They also need to expire, so we know that we're in an unusual situation, but these are not to be the maps that will continue on. They should expire before 2030. And we also want all of the legislatures that are considering new maps to also promise that they are going to go and fight for independent map process. And we think the best way to do that is federally.
Ryan, what does it mean? What would it mean for some Illinois voters to be moved into a new district if that should happen?
Yeah. It means it's harder to hold elected officials accountable. The more that we gerrymander the state, it just means the outcomes are predetermined. Voters have less and less say. We already know in Illinois that our elections, from congressional down to state races, are not competitive. And that's not a unique Illinois problem, but it is something we should be using redistricting as a tool to fix, not one to entrench power. Redistricting should be a tool to put more power in the hands of voters to hold elected officials accountable, not the other way around.
What is your advice then to Illinois lawmakers as they're sort of approaching this consideration, knowing what some other states, Indiana in particular, might be doing?
Yeah. For us, I think every state should be waiting until the 2031 census to do a remap. This is not, it's highly unusual. It's not unprecedented, but it's highly unusual for there to be a mid-decade remap. And this is all about political control and gaining power of Congress. And so for us, we should hold off and ensure that for the next redistricting process that there are stuff in place to make sure that voters can participate in the process, have a say, and have districts that truly empower them.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. We'll see what all the lawmakers come up with. Ryan Tolley and Elizabeth Grossman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Up next, the Trump administration is ending automatic renewals for some immigrant work permits, what it means for workers and employers. Trump administration is moving to end automatic extensions to some immigrant work permits. When a work permit expired under the Biden administration, immigrants were given a 540-day extension so they could still legally work while their renewal request was in consideration. The Department of Homeland Security says the change aims to increase vetting and ensure national security. But critics say it could have large-scale ramifications for the economy and impact both thousands of workers and many more thousands of Americans who rely on the jobs those workers do. Joining us with more on the potential impact are Nubia Willman, an attorney and the Chief Programs Officer for Latinos Progresando. And on Zoom, we have Adriel Orozco, Senior Policy Counsel for the American Immigration Council, and Jackie Stevens, Political Science Professor and Founding Director of the Deportation Research Clinic at Northwestern University. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. Nubia, starting with you, please. How will this impact workers who had been receiving these extensions up to now?
It will really cause a fear and a concern for their livelihood because there's going to be inevitably a delay. Government is not precise, it's not necessarily quick, and sometimes the process takes between 3 to 6 to 10 months. And so this idea that you'll be able to file and still receive it before your work permit expires isn't necessarily accurate, and that's why this policy was put in place to begin with. And so now we're sort of back at square one, where workers are going to have to reconsider if they're going to be even eligible for work, and their employers are also going to have to figure out what their duties are if this person no longer has work authorization. So it really puts everything on its head.
Does that mean that, you know, some folks in the interim, right, are going to be without a legal work permit, without legal work authorization?
Yes, it's very possible. If their work permit expires and they're no longer eligible for this extension, they might be in this limbo where they are no longer eligible to work with this authorization, and so their employers are going to have to be responsive, and it can really make things just even more difficult.
What kind of workers will this impact? Industries?
So workers are everywhere. Immigrants are working in all sectors and all industries. I think what's important is that this extension is getting removed from folks who are potentially applying for asylum, who are survivors of domestic violence, whose spouses are applying for them. They will no longer be eligible for this extension.
Okay, so no particular industry or worker impacted more than others?
No, not necessarily. It's more the immigrants themselves.
What about their employers?
Their employers have a duty as employers, right? That your Department of Labor gives you these things that you have to do. And so if your worker no longer has work authorization, there are certain steps you have to take. And that also, as an employer, those are steps that you are now have to hold in on you and have to then work through, which is also some more chaos and more responsibilities.
A lot more questions, I'm sure. So when announcing this change, the Department of Homeland Security said in a statement, quote, "It's a common sense measure to ensure appropriate vetting and screening has been completed before an alien's employment authorization or documentation is extended. All aliens must remember that working in the United States is a privilege, not a right." Adriel, first, what do you make of that statement? And would the lack of renewals put immigrants at risk of being detained by ICE?
Well, I do think it's really important to emphasize that part of the process here for a person to get a work permit extension is for them to actually proactively file an application to renew the work permit, which has their name, which has their address. They're paying for this. They also have a benefit request. Like was said, it might be an asylum application, it might be a green card application. It also impacts refugees and asylees to some extent, right? Because some of them want to use these work permits as identity documents as well, and an easier way to prove that they're work authorized. So the government has every tool that it needs to be able to vet individuals. And in fact, the reason why, like what was said by Nubia, is that this work permit extension rule has been in place since at least 2016 in some form, is to help with gaps in employment, to make sure that there's certainty. So the government is able to vet individuals if it wants to. It just doesn't have the resources right now to do so in a streamlined way. As was said before, work permit applications take months to process. USCIS actually requests individuals to submit them at least 6 months in advance, but there are plenty of applications that are going to be impacted that take more than 6 months to process. So I do think that there isn't a strong basis here where the government is arguing that they don't have the tools to be able to properly vet individuals.
Adriel, what options are available for those whose work permits may expire in the interim, and maybe are they not able to work at that point, not legally anyway?
quite unfortunately, if a work permit expires before they would be able to work up to 6 months or even 540 days, as was extended under the Biden administration. But if their work permit expires and their new work permit hasn't been approved, they have to stop working unless they might have some legal ramifications for their benefits applications. So this is what's going to cause a lot of confusion and a lot of uncertainty for employers and workers because they may have been waiting until last Thursday. They might have a month left, even 5 months left on their current work permit, thinking that they were going to benefit from the previous extension. But now, because that's gone since at the end of last week, they might have submitted their application, but now it's going to take months for that to occur. So people might be having to lose weeks, even months of work because of this change.
Jackie Stevens, ICE has been, we know, detaining asylum seekers, those with temporary protected status, many other immigrants and refugees who have documentation. How likely is it that people with expired work permits will then be targeted? Because, you know, as we heard Adriel say, you know, all this documentation provides information on where people are living and working.
Well, thank you for that question. And yes, I mean, what it does is it enlarges the scope of people who are going to be subject to ICE arrests and harassment, and puts people who are already in a precarious position in further jeopardy.
Tell me more. What are your primary concerns for how this rule might impact the economy at large?
Right. So, I mean, this rule was rolled out in the most irresponsible way possible. The 2024 Biden rule that this is revising went through meticulous estimates and, talked about the impact of the rule on the economy, how it would benefit businesses, how it would benefit the federal government by increasing taxes that would be collected by allowing people to remain, authorized to work and, therefore pay their taxes. The new rule completely disregards any kind of estimates on the economy that are supposed to be there by law. And instead of that, it engages in this, kind of reckless fear-mongering, throwing around tropes about national security and Molotov cocktails and, like a lot of, kind of scenarios that are really ad hoc and not tied to the conditions of hundreds of thousands of people who are lawfully in the country and lawfully employed. The concern about terrorists and so forth and vetting disregards the fact that this is a renewal. So the people who are working have already been authorized. And if there are any particular problems or criminal histories and so forth, those are going to be caught by monitoring and police and so forth and regular kinds of, law enforcement operations that we have at present. There's no evidence at all that someone having work authorization is going to be more likely to commit crime. And in fact, if you remove the work authorization, it obviously follows that people are going to be incentivized to try to
find
work
alternatives.
Around the system.
Exactly, to find alternatives to make some income.
Adriel, I just want to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to move on to Adriel. Are there any grounds for a lawsuit against the Trump administration around this rule change?
Well, I think there are definitely people who are looking into it. And as Jackie was mentioning, some of the bases here for this rule's implementation and actually bypassing public comment and notice are things that lawyers are looking about. And so we do expect that litigation could be forthcoming because just like other rules that we've seen, that there isn't a lot of proper analysis of the impact of this rule, and there's no ability for people to have a meaningful voice in how it's being constructed.
Nubia, we're past October 30th. That is when this took effect, and it happened obviously very quickly, taking immediate effect. What can workers do to prepare themselves for renewing their permits now in this new process?
Absolutely. If you have an attorney, an immigration attorney, you should go and speak to them about renewing your application, and you should look to see what your time frame is. The best practice is 180 days, but maybe even more, you should check to see your processing times, which you can do online. And it's just important at this point in time to make sure you're getting a consultation by a trusted, licensed immigration attorney or accredited DOJ rep to ensure that you know what your options are.
What kind of resources do you recommend people go in search of?
Well, you can come to latinospro.org to learn more about the services that we provide, and we're happy to give referrals to other partners as well.
Adriel, same question to you. What resources do you recommend people go searching for?
Well, I do think that it's really important to just stay on top of the news and make sure that people hear about any lawsuits that are being imposed against this. But also, I think people should go and check their work permit right now and make sure that if their validity period is about to end or is close to ending, that they do, as Nubia said, think ahead and thinking about submitting those applications.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it. Best of luck to those folks who are dealing with this new process. Nubia Willman, Adriela Roscoe, and Jackie Stevens, thanks to all of you for joining us. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Reflecting the people and perspectives that make up our communities, this story is part of Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Be sure to sign up for our free email newsletter, The Daily Chicagoan, at WTTW.com/newsletter. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that gives back to its community in Chicago and beyond.